cheesy. Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and welcome to Page Chewing Episode 3 with Mr. P.L. Stuart. And before P.L. can have a chance to introduce himself, I wanted to take this chance to tell him congratulations on the pre-orders for his second book are available now, because I know he won't mention it, so I have to do it for him. So, P.L., you want to talk about your book and the pre-orders that are now available for the copies.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor. Thank you so much, Steve. Yep, it's my second baby, the last of the Atlanteans. Book 2 of the John Kingdom Saga's out. So pre-orders here. If you're interested, send me a DM. But yeah, thank you so much. Honored to be here and honored to have two incredible authors, two, not one, but two SPFBO finalists, and two people I consider humble to consider dear friends, Tim Hardie and H.L. Tinsley. Of course, we know both of them are a big deal in the writing community. Tim Hardie, author of Sundered Souls and Hollow Bones. This is the sequel. Sorry, this one's a sequel, and this is the one that's currently an SPFBO finalist. And of course, H.L. Tinsley, We Men of Ash and Shadow. And the follow-up is now in pre-order. I'll let her tell you more about that. The Hand That Cast the Bone. Amazing. So, welcome to Page Chewing, Tim and HL.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, cheers.
And I did just finish. I'm reading Hollow Bones now, but I did finish The Hand That Cast the Bone. I want to thank Holly again for giving me the chance to read that early, and I loved it. And so anyone who enjoyed We Men of Ash and Shadow will love the second book. So just want to throw that out there. So thanks for, I know it's always tough with time zones and everything. Both of you are in the UK, so thanks for making it work. I know it's not always easy, so we appreciate you guys taking the time.
Yeah, no worries. I'm still confused by time zones, even now. It's been 2 years and I still don't know what time zones are. I mean, I know what they are, but I don't know what times people are in. I'm terrible with them.
Yeah, obviously we flirt with danger by having British summertime and GMT just to add, and you don't move at the same time either, do you? Which also adds to the peril at this time of year.
There's always some kind of mix-up around this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. You two have become so popular now. I think it's the rare person that hasn't heard of either one of you, your work in the especially in the indie community. However, do you mind giving us a quick, Reader's Digest version of who you are and what you write and that sort of thing?
I'll let Tim go first on this one.
I was going to let you go first, which is we're so British, we're so polite. We're just going to you're going to get nothing out of us. Right, I'll go first. So, what is my book about? I'd probably describe it as Viking-inspired dark fantasy. So, Hall of Bones starts off with a strong sort of Viking macho warrior culture vibe, but then sort of slowly moves into much more of a sort of magical realm as the sort of book and the series starts to progress, really. So Hall of Bones, it's really, I suppose, in a sense, it starts as a family in peril and sort of basically a ruling clan trying to survive the pressures of the world sort of kind of pressing around them, and challenges coming in from what appears to be just legitimate Viking rivalries, I suppose, between different clans warring, which has kind of been what their experience has been like for hundreds of years. But actually there's something else going on within that, where one of their main rivals has actually been effectively overtaken by a more malevolent magical force, and that becomes clearer and becomes effectively the driving force of the story as it kind of goes on. So that gives you a bit of an idea.
And Holly?
Okay, so mine, as Pierre very kindly showed you the cover earlier, but I'll hold it up again just in case. We're Men of Ash and Shadow. It's essentially a grim, dark gas lamp fantasy. It follows a soldier turned mercenary through life in a very corrupt, criminally led city where the citizens are very put upon, and it's just not a nice place to be generally. And through the course of his work, it's about the people that he meets, especially he meets a young man who he sees as someone he could possibly mentor and kind of teach about the world of shadowy back streets and dark dealings. So, and it follows him, and it's got a kind of a Gangs of New York, Peaky Blinders, Assassin's Creed kind of vibe to it. As it's been mentioned as well, the second one is coming out on April the 21st as well, The Hand That Cast the Bone. So that pre-orders are up now on Amazon for that, and that is a continuation of the story and just following the journey of John Vanguard and all the shady, morally corrupt people that he meets along the way, and occasionally the odd nice one as well.
So how does it feel to have the second book almost ready for, out in the hands of some readers and now available for you have a release date? What is that? Are you nervous, or what is that like?
I mean, yeah, I've been absolutely terrified. I keep joking to people and saying that I haven't felt any nerves, but it's been constant terror for the past probably 3 months, to be honest with you. I think now it's in the hands of people and reviewers, and a couple of people are reading it for me very kindly, have read early copies. I'd like to say the nerves are dissipating, but they're not. If anything, they're ramping up now at this point. I honestly don't know how Tim's got through this with his second book. It's just the most surreal experience, because the first one you don't know what to expect. The second one, there are so many expectations, and you don't want to disappoint people, but on the one hand that you are, some people are going to be disappointed with the choices that you make. So, you do have this very different approach to it, where you have to really think, is this the story I originally intended? Am I putting in all the things I need to? Am I giving the readers all the things that I need to give them for a second book? So, yeah, it's a whole different set of emotions that you go through. And I'm very happy I'm coming to the end of it, but yeah, I'm still very, very stressed at the minute.
Well, I can say that having read that book, being honored with a pre-art copy, you have nothing to worry about. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Tim, I think we're all kind of in the same boat. Tim's a bit ahead. He's working on his third, if I'm not mistaken. We all talk, the three of us as authors, pretty frequently, and we talk about that pressure that Hardie referred to with second book syndrome, and just that the weight of expectations. So what's helped you to get through that? I know I can say for me, a large part of helping to get through that is the two of you and other people that I really trust and that have supported me, that I care about. So what's gotten you through that second book pressure?
That's a good question, isn't it? I think you're spot on. I think actually linking up with writers and actually getting them to support you is actually one of the things you really need, because I think I've described, before, that this sort of business is a little bit psychologically damaging in some ways. You get the joy of good reviews, but you also get people that aren't necessarily a big fan, and that can be quite hard. And a bit, I can really relate to Holly's nerves, but I think it's a lot of it is based around ignorance initially. So when you're self-publishing, in particular, going indie, everything is so new. There's so much to do, and frankly, this is really my experience. Holly was obviously completely different and just nailed it and totally knew what she was doing. But in my experience, I was simply grappling with so many things. There wasn't really time to be terrified. All I was focused on was getting the book out there, and I think the dynamic sort of shifts when you've got. Once people read it and oh my goodness, somebody actually likes this, that the pressure ramps up because you've actually got an audience. Whereas at first I thought the most important thing was to find an audience. That would be quite straightforward then, to keep them happy. But actually it's harder than that, because I think writing books in multiple arcs and all the rest of it, in some ways standalones are easier, because if you can write a standalone, people are invested in that, that's great, but they know they're getting one book in a series and that, boom, you're done and you move on to the next. With a series, people get invested. And so I've literally had people say, if anything happens to this character, I am dropping you like a hot rock, which I thought, that's a bit of a problem based upon the plot line I've developed for these four books. That might prove a challenge. So, it's a different dynamic where you feel like you owe it to the readers to sort of deliver what they want. But like Holly said, you've also got to stay true to actually what you're trying to do with that book and that series as well. Otherwise, in the end, if you're not careful, you try and please everybody, you'll please nobody. And that's an important thing to remember as well. People are entitled to not like your series as it develops and to drop off that series. That's not against the law. It's not good for the bank balance. It's not, it's actually a legitimate thing to do. And I think the crucial thing is to make sure you're happy with what you're actually putting out there, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think the funny thing is, I can't remember quite what words Tim used there, but it kind of made me realise all of a sudden, just for that second, that when you're an author and you're kind of putting out, like, not just a second book, but any book, really, that process that you go through is so hidden. It almost becomes like a version of an Instagram photo where you know that the person that's done it has done like 700 different versions of it. And then the one that you see is the one where they're really cool and collected and they completely know what they're doing. But actually behind the scenes, it's just like a little hamster running in a wheel trying to work out what to do.
Yeah.
That was my experience anyway.
Yeah, no, it's completely relatable. It's yeah, I suppose there's all that stuff that goes on, and again, this is why that author network is important. You know, I think for anybody starting out indie and wanting to sort of do this themselves, you have got to realise you are doing all of it yourself, not just a bit. I mean, obviously you can subcontract it out, that increases the cost, but fundamentally you've got to do most of that legwork yourself, and there are lots of pitfalls to this that I think, again, if you don't talk to other people, you'll simply happily fall into the same pitfall that the previous million people who couldn't figure out how the hell Amazon systems worked either have already fallen into. It's really helpful just to share that knowledge, really, and then you might not need to take quite so many shots to get it right.
Yeah, you two have the additional pressure, and still ongoing, of releasing books, writing books while the SPFBO finals, of which you're both in.
Is that still going?
Yeah, like so that I assume that adds another layer of pressure. I mean, can you tell us about what that means to be writing a second or a third book? You have all the spotlight of the fantasy world on you with SPFBO because it's such a hyped. The hype is real. You're both in the finals, one of 10 books out of 300. So how does that add to the potential pressure?
Tim, do you want to go on this
one? I was going to give that to you, Holly.
Oh, okay. I mean, for me, obviously the whole experience of the SPFBO has been fantastic, and kind of talking to the other authors that are in it and getting to engage with new readership that I probably wouldn't have had before has been amazing. I think in terms of bringing out a second book during that time, it almost feels like a bit of a double-edged sword, because as much as it's amazing because, like you say, you've got the hype behind it, you've got all the momentum of it. You are also you're in a place where you're being judged. We're being judged all the time when people read our books, but with something like the SPFBO, the bloggers and the judges, they are so good at what they do, and they're so renowned, as judges and as people who give, fantastic critiques. So you are kind of exposing yourself to flaws and things like that, which you do with, like I say, any kind of review, but the scale is so much bigger and it feels so much bigger. So I think for me, it's the same kind of nerves that you would get with any kind of reviewer or any kind of exposure for your work. It's just that it's magnified for me. So, but you take all that aside, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Like I would do this all over again in a heartbeat. I might need a month or two to recover, but I would 100% do it because it's such an overwhelmingly positive experience.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was in two minds about whether to do this, because it was all about a strategy to enter All the Bones for SPFBO, always. And then when it got to it, I thought I had a bit of a wobble, if I'm perfectly honest with you, because all of a sudden it's like, God, it's a bit public, this, isn't it? If it gets bounced out in the first month, isn't that awful? And I think in the reality is that there are some people that will look at all 300 books and they will go through them. Some people are really big fans of this competition now. It's grown, hasn't it, each year? And I think if you're any doubt about doing it, I would definitely encourage you as an independent author to do it, because the worst that can happen is you will get cut, and that is the worst. But then if you weren't in it, you're not even in it to begin with, and it still provides you with a review. It provides you, from a respected blog that a lot of people are looking at. You will still get that attention even at that early stage. And, I think I consider myself to a certain extent to have lucked out a little bit to have got into the finals of the competition. There is an element of dumb luck that comes into this. But that kind of, that final sort of experience of moving into the second 6 months or 5 months, whatever it is. It has been fantastically positive. And a bit like Holly says, I've found out I've discovered lots of books I want to read. I'm not saying I'm going to have time to read them all, but it's widened my horizons again about what's out there, what other authors are doing. And I think that's a really important part of, again, being an author yourself. You do need to know what other people are up to. It's important to get those ideas and see how the genre is sort of moving on. And from my point of view, it's opened my eyes actually to quite a lot of different things and new authors, like I said. So yeah, if you're in doubt, do it, because only good can come from it fundamentally.
Yeah. I just want to add as well, secret revelation. I actually wouldn't have even been a part of this year's SPFBO if it hadn't been for a certain person, Mr. P.L. Stewart.
Is that true? I did not know that.
Absolutely, 100% true. Yeah, I think me and Pierre were chatting at some point, and he kind of said to me, "Are you doing SPFBO this year?" And I went, "No, I'm not SPFBO material. There's no way I've got the confidence to do this." And he was like, "Yeah, you can do it." So thank you very much, Pierre Stewart.
But that's the point again, isn't it? That's authors helping each other to see the wood for the trees sometimes. Well, you do need that. I do think you need that network to sort of make you more successful, because it's very easy to sort of say you're not good enough, or to, I had a similar thing where a blogger said to me, "You are entering, aren't you?" I thought I was, but I'm slightly crapping it now. And it's like, look, don't be stupid. You need to put your book in. Sometimes you just need that little nudge in the right direction, don't you? So well done, PL. That was a good call.
I mean, obviously, you two are both extremely deserving finalists. You're two authors that I look up to immensely. But in Holly's case, I think she knew she was going to enter. I think maybe just hearing someone else talk to her, and I mean, obviously, people were already raving about her book. Her book was already getting a lot of hype. It was a no-brainer for me. It's like, she's a grimdark darling when it comes to we men. So no-brainer. So just, I kept like, come on, you got to do it. So I'm so happy that she did. But I'm sure it wasn't just me pushing her to go in, because the world knows how talented Holly is, and knows how talented you are, and so I'm curious. When this is a question I have for the two of you that it's funny, I've never even asked you before, in all our numerous chats, that I feel that, obviously the UK is a big place with a long, rich history and diverse culture, many different people, many different backgrounds, etc. But do you feel there's a certain, traditionally, there's something about Brits and fantasy, and how British write fantasy? Is there any commonality or common thread that you feel runs through a lot of British fantasy that you've encountered, especially stuff that helped inspire you, like stuff that you read, that inspired you to be a writer?
I'm going to put Holly on the spot here, because I think Holly, I think your book is very British. I know that it's got this sort of kind of French European feel in terms of the city and where it's set, but I think for me that sense of humour that runs through it's a very, very British sense of humour, and I think that book comes across that way. I'm not sure if it had been written by somebody from the other side of the Atlantic, it would have been the same story actually. So I think you can definitely see that. I think in some writers that they bring that in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know in terms of seeing like a commonality with kind of British writers. I do think there are certain tones that our writing tends to take, especially when you're writing kind of the more comedic elements. So I do think that we're quite, I don't know if we're well known, but I think we're certainly very comfortable with gallows humour. I think we generally have a much darker edge to our sense of humour, and I think we're very comfortable with being like self-deprecating, and a lot of our comedy is based on the fact that things are pretty bad, but they could be worse. I think probably the quintessential example of that is going to be Terry Pratchett. I had to really think there and think, is Terry Pratchett British? How bad is that?
Yeah, he is. You're all right. We're on solid ground here.
I had a horrible fear then, but no, we're all good. But I think just the sense of humor, the comedy, and especially the comedy observations in the way that society works and the world works in his books, that is very quintessentially how we do kind of talk to each other and we do interact in real life when we're, you know, being humorous. So yeah, and other than that, just constant mention of like tea and crumpets I find really helps as well.
Yeah.
And cricket, obviously.
Yeah, there's no cricket in my books. There is tea, and actually, yes, whether that would have been the case if I'd been, you know, not been English. Who knows? But yeah, I think I'm not. I think yeah, I think those sort of tones, like Holly described, definitely you see in sort of British authors. But I think in some ways it's more about then also how we then present that work to the world as well. So I really do struggle with saying my book is brilliant. I'm much more happy to say my book is almost as good as Mark Lawrence or something. Not really at all. I don't actually mean that. I can't believe I said it and then curling up into a ball and dying. And so I think it's also about how we present the work as much as it is, you know, what we write as well. But yeah, I think that self-deprecating thing is a particular British trait that's more or less universal, really.
Yeah, I think as Brits we're like I can't think of the words, but basically we're like trained from birth to never expect too much. There's a certain level that you can get to, and then that's it. You're not going to go beyond that. So you know, you just sit there and then you're happy with that.
That's what we're taught at school. Just expect disappointment, and then you can't be disappointed. And you know, I've applied that sort of lesson many times, and yeah, it's. I don't know. We're not. I'm personally not very comfortable in the limelight. I've got to say, you know, I quite find it quite. I suppose I find it almost quite extraordinary. People want to read what I've written. I know that sounds really bizarre as an author. You know, you think that would be a pretty key attribute, but again, it's sort of like when I started writing, I wasn't writing for you. I was writing for me, and it was actually a sort of a way to wind down from work, get away from it, do something completely different, and you know. I thought I was all right at it, but to be honest with you, it took me a long time to get to the point where I thought, actually, this is something where it's not pointless to do it on your own and just simply not share it. But this is good enough now that actually I would quite like somebody else to give me their opinion on what they think about it. So I think, you know, a lot of writers actually probably are that a bit like I've just described, a little bit introverted. You know, it's by definition, it's a solitary occupation, isn't it? And then all of a sudden we kind of, to actually find an audience, you've got to be a very different person and actually sort of get comfortable with things that probably don't naturally fit within your skill set, really, not initially anyway.
Yeah, I really noticed that, and through your books as well. Like when I think of you know, the Joe Abercrombies and the Mark Lawrences, this really snarky, you know, Joel, like the wit is just so. Like, you know, it reminds me of, like, my mom was a big fan of Dave Allen at Large, great British comedian, you know, and I love watching the Monty Python stuff. And it doesn't matter what you watch that's British. Like I said, for me, I all saw that thread, that humor that was just so you know, just, and being able, as you said, to self-deprecate, to laugh at yourself, right? To make fun of yourself and mock yourself and be at almost, and not just be comfortable with it, but almost, it was like therapy, right? And I love that element of British humor. So, but I definitely see that in your books and a lot of British authors. So, but I did want to ask. So, you know, and again, you know, I these are I'm very humbled again that Holly and Tim are people that I speak to fairly regularly. You know, now that, you know, you're, as much as you may want to avoid it, Tim, you're in the limelight. You can't hide now. That spotlight is shining big and bold on both of you and your work. Sorry, it's you can press the blackout for the screen, Tim.
Oh yeah, I could do that.
You'll forget. Why take the easy route, right?
Yeah, this room actually I've just realized this room isn't big enough for me to actually escape the wide-angle camera lens. That's another thing that I should have thought through.
It's because you don't have a big ego. You don't need a big room, right? You just need this. So, anyways, so now that the spotlight has been shining on you too with SPFBO, how, and it's not going to be you two, I'm pretty confident. We've all seen writers that unfortunately, you know, they do really well initially, and things tend to fade out after that. It from a variety of reasons, variety of circumstances. So what's going to keep Tim Hardie and H.L. Tinsley? What's going to keep you prominent and in the spotlight in the future in terms of your works and what you plan to do?
God, that assumes there's a plan. Holly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably going to have to start making good on some of these like marketing ideas I keep throwing out on Twitter, about me like riding through town on the back of a carriage with a pack of wolves. So I'm going to have to up the ante a little bit. I don't know is the answer to that, because I think you're being kept in the spotlight as an author is so reliant on other people. Rather than yourself. Yes, there is a certain amount that we can do in terms of, screaming out and saying we're here, these are our books, this is the work we do. But really, the platform that we stand on is built by bloggers and reviewers and readers. So we really just need to make sure that we're engaging in the best possible way with our readership. Just making sure that even when you're not, I mean, I've taken 2 years to write this second book, I think. My math isn't that great, but about that. And during that time, I've had a couple of periods where I've really sank out of like social media and kind of chatting with people because I've been focused on the work. And I've noticed that my engagement really dropped off. So I wasn't, seeing many posts. I wasn't kind of hearing as much about it. Yet I kind of went back and I made more posts which were totally unrelated to the book or anything I was doing. I think they were just probably like 90% of what I post, just absolutely ridiculous thoughts that came into my head. But because then there was that presence and that engagement, people would be like, oh, okay, you are still here. So, and then I'd kind of start talking to people and say, this is what I'm doing. So I think, you don't have to feel like you've got to constantly talk about this is my book, this is my book, this is my book. You can just go and be present in the community and kind of in the writing world. And I think that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get chased by wolves. I've decided, all that sort of gimmicky stuff. I think often people feel there are certain things they've got to do, and actually, the only thing you should do, and I think, is actually just genuinely be yourself. Because ultimately nothing else kind of really comes close to that. Social media is a great tool, but it's really easy to sort of feel almost like a constant pressure to use it all the time, and that can actually be very, very distracting and what have you. So, it's a spotlight. That spotlight will move on to other people, and and rightly so. What it has done, I think, from my point of view, is give me an audience. And I think, like Holly says, you just simply need to sort of assure your audience you're still there writing books. I think that's the other bit to this is, yes, exist, be honest, connect with your audience, but also the crucial thing is to keep writing books. And I think that is actually the most important single marketing strategy of all. I know Mr. Stuart has written a phenomenal number of books and is quite intimidating when it comes to your level of preparedness compared to me, desperately scraping it all together at the moment. But that, I think, there's often so much goes into that first book, or even actually the second, that sort of it carries you in. And I'm trying to write a third at the moment. I'm finding that actually much harder than anything I've written up until now. And it makes me it's made me realize that a lot of people have got a book in them. Not so many people have got the staying power to have a series in them. And I think particularly when they realize it's not this is a long game, and actually building that audience it takes years. It's not a matter of months. Very, very rare that happens. So it does require a certain patience, a certain mindset to kind of get through. So that's not, I suppose in a way that is marketing, because you've got to have a product to market, haven't you? But it's not always easy to sort of you can lose sight of that. That is the absolute bedrock of everything else we're actually here to talk about, really, isn't it? And sometimes the other stuff can become quite distracting. I'll be honest, Spiffbo is quite distracting. Every day I will go on and think, have anyone been reviewed? No one has been reviewed today. But I will still check that another 2 or 3 times during the day, because I am, I'd quite like to find out what's going on. And it's at the back of your mind all the time. And social media is a bit like that as well. These things, if you're not careful, you can sort of find yourself getting distracted and not actually getting down to the task at hand. Like Holly, what you did, Holly, was absolutely right. pull back, engage a little bit, but get the job done is actually the most important thing.
Is that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please, Steve.
I was just going to ask, how long is that process for something like SFPO? Is that months, or how long is that wait from the minute you submit to the minute you find out?
I think each competition lasts about 18 years.
I think it's pretty much the finish line is in sight now. I think it's end of next month or May. I think it wraps up, but I mean it goes on, for a full year essentially, straight from when you enter the books through to the very finalist at the end. And I think what I've discovered, and I think obviously Tim's been through the same thing, is that with the SPFBO, it's very much pockets of emotions. Because obviously there's all these different kind of levels that you get to through it. So there's the full 300 books are read, and then you kind of have that wait where you're waiting for semi-finalists, and then you have the finalists, and then you kind of have your last month where, traditionally you get an influx of lots of reviews coming in all at once. So for me, it kind of feels like it was really like an emotional roller coaster, but then it almost felt like I'd got off it because it all went a bit quiet. I went and had a little sit down, and now I'm just back on it again. So it's it's a very surreal and fantastic experience that kind of just sends you like this for a full year.
Yeah, and I think the emotions are all over the place. I mean, April is the month when, by my calculation, at least 50% of those reviews are going to land in April, and it's going to be basically mayhem. It's that leaderboard at the moment is fairly static. People are sort of moving by the odd incremental point as reviews come in, and a few people are still actually to get that average and actually sort of get their sort of placing. It's going to go all over the place in that final burst because there are going to be so many reviews landing. I don't know how it's a good job Mark Lawrence is adding that stuff up, because I would not want that responsibility and that pressure, because imagine if you got it wrong. So yeah, a bit like Holly says, roller coaster kind of thing. I think the fact it's 12 months. In some ways it's great for authors that especially the finalists, you get that long spotlight. I actually feel in some ways that the bigger challenge is for the reviewers and the blogs, because I'm not entering next year. I don't have a qualifying book apart from anything else. And it's I've really enjoyed it, but I'll also quite enjoy not having the distraction and getting back onto focusing on book 3 and getting that written. Whereas obviously the bloggers will roll round, and come May, a whole swelter of books are going to land again, and they're going to have to gear up and start all over again. So it's fun for the author, but it's a really, really big commitment for those bloggers actually.
Yeah, and I guess what we're talking about too is, do you feel that because now again you have a wider readership that both you had prior to SPFPO, your books were still becoming fairly well known, but now of course, things have blown up. So is there a cost for the fame, for the attention? Is there a cost for now being, someone who, is in that spotlight?
I think like I said before, I think that there's a distraction to it because it's new and shiny. So that there's a cost in that sense. I don't really feel like it's the cost of fame. I don't think I'd go that far. I'm somebody has heard of occasionally. I don't think it's quite as elevating to quite that sort of level. It's more, I think for me, it's case it's opened my eyes to those wider possibilities and that wider indie readership. Really, what I will say is I'm reading pretty much 90% indie fiction at the moment, and I'm loving doing that. That's probably been one of the bigger changes in many ways, rather than I suppose feeling different about myself. It's more about what I read and what I consume. Got a certain Holly Tinsley book on my bookshelf. Not on my bookshelf. I'm actually in the middle of reading 25% in, and the cat-related humour in that, which is very British, is amazing. And I'm going to put that in my review for 100% sure.
I knew that was going to get mentioned tonight. Before I even logged on, I knew that was going to get mentioned.
How could it not?
I'm sorry, I'm going to completely derail the conversation now, just because right at the beginning, when I think it was PL, you asked about the experience of writing a second book. one thing that I have had with this that I didn't get with the first one, obviously, because people didn't know me, is that this time around, people who are reading it, like my ARC readers and my beta readers, keep messaging me certain lines out of the book, and it's got to the stage now where before I even open the message, because I know what kind of percentage they're through, I know which line it's gonna be before, and that's just like the best experience ever. So I've absolutely loved that, and I really hope that if I obviously I'm going to do a third book that the same happens again. So yeah, I'm glad that Tim brought that up, and if anybody is wondering what the cat scene is, they're going to have to just pre-order.
Yes, that's all you can do. I'm not going to spill the beans here. That'd be wrong. So,
that was some smooth marketing there. That was.
You see how naturally we're British, but we can market if we put our mind to it. We can make this happen.
Didn't even rehearse this at all.
No.
Completely natural. I have no idea what we were talking about. I'm sorry, PL.
There was a serious question he asked ages ago. Holly knows the line, and I can't say the line because you need to pre-order. But that line is all I can think of now, and it's 3 words that are burned into my memory forevermore. And I'll let you know later on, Mr. Stuart, what they are.
When we finish this later. We'll finish later. I might have to see if you, because obviously you two have both read it and finished it, whereas Tim's doing it. See if you can guess which bit it is that Tim's talking about. There'll be some sort of prize for the winner. I'm joking.
Okay.
But anyway, back to the conversation.
Bring us back. Come on. Give us a question. We won't, train wreck for you.
We have lots. Steve and I had the privilege of having Jenny Wirtz on the other day on Page Chewing. Obviously, iconic author, phenomenal. I mean, I recommend anyone who needs a pep talk and a kick in the butt about writing, listen to that, and wow, it will just blow you away. Someone who has decades worth of perspective in writing, and just fabulous. Honored to consider her a friend, and she's just on a different level. So when I think about someone like Jandy, again, who has that decades now of writing, 4 decades, if not more, of writing perspective, I'm not asking you to completely predict the future, and crystal balls are very fragile things, but where do you think Tim Hardie and H.L. Tinsley are going to be in terms of their writing career in, let's just say 4 decades? Where are you guys going to be? How many books can you have written? What kind of books will you venture off, you think, into different genres? You still be writing predominantly fantasy? What's the future hold for you two?
I'm really fighting being British here and just simply saying something along the lines of, washed up in an old people's care home somewhere. But no, there has to be more plan. There has to be more plan than that. I've got a few. I know I'm going to finish Hall of Bones and the Brotherhood of the Eagle, the full series that starts with Hall of Bones. I know it because I'm close now, so I know that I'll end up with that quartet of books done. From my point of view, I think I can. My sort of vague plan is to get a book out a year until so quite how long I'll find that interesting for. It's really hard to say, isn't it? You do something you love, but sometimes you can fall in and out of love with things. But I definitely want to finish the series I've started. So I'll definitely have written 4 books by the time I've done. I have got a couple of other projects on the back burner. There's a short story series that I think will come together in a few years' time, so that's kind of happening. And I've got another, so same world but different continent. I've got another book that I've already written that's out to sort of trad publication submission at the moment. So I'm confident that will get released in some shape or form. If it goes trad, that'll be how it happens. If it doesn't go trad, then it'll go indie, and I'm pretty confident that that decision is coming up fairly soon in the next year or 2. So that's kind of at least sort of 6 book stroke collections that I'd like to get done, and then I consider that that's my sort of starting point, really. That's as far as the plan goes. But I just enjoy doing it. So I suppose as long as there's people that want to buy it and read it, I'm quite happy to sort of carry on, really, and see where it takes me. So I've got a plan, but not again. Mr. P.L. Stuart here has got the quite frightening, and I would almost say borderline insane plan for
There's
exactly
no
how many
borderline
books.
about it.
No, Frank. Yeah, embrace the insanity.
Complete insanity. Embrace it.
Yeah. You know, you're incredibly planned, I have to say. And you know, you've got a whole set of series planned. You've got prequels. You know, you kind of know that structure. You know, pretty much how they're going to lay down. I would say that is unusual, to say the least. But yeah, I think that's as far as my plan goes. I've kind of got about 6 projects in there rattling around in my head at the moment.
I would love to say that I will write a book a year. I would absolutely love to say that, but sadly, it's just not going to happen for me. You know, I mean, I'm very, very fortunate that I write all the time. My whole life pretty much is writing. I do it for a living, outside of books as well. So for me, it's kind of 70, 80 hours a week of writing is not unusual. So for me, it does take a little bit longer with the books because I have other projects that I need to focus that time on. I think obviously I'm going to finish off the series I'm doing in the Vanguard Chronicles. So there's another 2 books planned in that at the moment. After that, I'm kind of in a bit of a conundrum at the moment because originally I had a series of 3 books that I wrote before I published the We Men of Ash and Shadow, and I have been deliberating whether or not to go back and revisit those. They are awful. They're really, really bad books. Everyone has to get at least one bad novel out of them before they can write a decent one. But I kind of feel like there's a story in there that still needs to be told. So at the moment, I am very much deliberating whether or not that will be the thing that I go to after I'm finished with the Vanguard stories. I may do something new. I don't know. At this point, I'm very much kind of being pulled. I think as a writer, you know when a story is calling to you, even if it's one that you put down 10 years ago. All of a sudden, you'll just hear that little voice in the back of your head saying, "Now is the time. Come on, come and see me again." So I think, yeah, at some point over the next year, I need to dust off those kind of cobweb covered printouts that I did several years ago and just read through them to see if there's any treasure hidden amongst the trash.
Just to sabotage my own career a bit, it's worth looking at those, your previous work, definitely. Because I wrote my sort of the quartet, I sort of got 3 books in and then put it aside. So Hall of Bones, Sundered Souls, and Lost Gods was all written by 2019, and I was frankly suffering a bit of fatigue from doing them. So I actually wrote a different book. That's the one that's actually out to trad submission right now. Quiet Vengeance is currently, that's the book I wrote as a bit of a stopgap. And then I kind of went, but then I sort of went back into the indie world of Hall of Bones and made that start. Got to Lost Gods. It's dreadful. It's absolutely dreadful. Now, obviously, I don't intend to release a dreadful book. So I'm working very hard on sort of rectifying that right now. But when I went back to it, I think my writing skill had basically outstripped where that book had got to. And so it wasn't a good book, but there were good things in it. And it was worth dusting off and starting again. So I think you might, with all the stuff you've learned, Holly, in the last sort of few years of putting your series together and that sort of thing, yeah, there might be some, howlers in that trunk. But you might also have the skills now to make what was bad in them good, or to rectify and fix those things. I found going back to Lost Gods was quite an interesting journey for me, because I realised I'd got better, basically.
What were the things that stood out to both of you going back and reading those first couple of novels that you've written, or what were the things that stood out to you that you recognized right away that this was you would do it better now than what you did before?
I'll let Tim go first on this one, I think.
Damn it. I think probably what I would do differently now is, I think Hall of Bones pacing wise, I'd probably tighten up a little bit. How obviously within the indie world you can rewrite your book as many times as you like. That's dangerous. That is a dangerous thing to do, because you'll never ever get off that first book. So I think learning about pacing. I think as well. Again, this is more getting to the specifics of I think possibly I may have let character numbers overtake me during the Hall of Bones and Brotherhood of the Eagle series. I'm not sure it actually needs 150 characters. It probably needs 30. But I was, again, I think, world building and character development crossed over, and it took me a long time for me to sort of, I'm not a pantser writer, I plot and then allow inspiration to take hold and add bits as I go. But I need to have that. I think now I would plot much tighter around which characters I need. And I think that would probably give the reader a slightly smoother experience. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a big character list. G.R.R. Martin's obviously excelled at sort of like that form of a novel where you've got that vast world and all the rest of it. But I think maybe I've just made it a little bit hard for the readers to keep up, especially by not even mentioning that there's a character list in the book until you get to the end. I think, again, I'd not fully appreciated with e-readers how different it is because I've only recently become a convert to ebooks. So before, I'm always used to taking a physical book, flicking through it, seeing what's in it, and seeing what's at the back. I always check what's at the back. But you don't do that with e-readers. So I think an awful lot of people did get lost in the book and didn't fully appreciate that there was actually some help. But unfortunately, it was help from page 421 onwards, which they might have appreciated, maybe being flagged a little bit more upstream. So yeah, a few technical and just practical things you don't think about in the throes of writing your first book, really.
I think for me, if I look at the very first book that I wrote, so the one way before We Men of Ash and Shadow, the biggest thing looking at it now is, and I think probably most first-time authors will go through something similar, is that when I read it, people talk about the author voice and you having your voice, is that at that time I knew what I wanted to write, but it wasn't being written in my voice. It was almost a mimicry of the writers I wanted to be. Rather than myself. So, I mean, I've got like reams of stories that I started and never finished that are in the style of authors that I admire and authors I like. And they just don't work because that's me trying to be somebody that I'm not. So I think if I were to go back and revisit the first one I wrote, it wouldn't be just a case of revisiting and tidying it. It would be a full rewrite because I am a totally different person now to who I was when I originally sat down and thought I want to write a novel. I think second to that as well, I think just through meeting people and talking to different people and having fantastic feedback from people, it's really helped me to learn about different perspectives and the way that people approach different things from different cultures and different backgrounds and different levels of like society and wealth and history. And I think that the characters, again, that I wrote when I initially sat down they were almost like caricatures of people that I'd seen throughout fantasy books that I'd read all my life. So they were very tropey and they were very two-dimensional. And I think now I've absorbed so much from so many wonderful people I can take elements of what they've told me and what I've learned from them and put them into those characters to kind of flesh them out and make them more 3D. So that, again, would probably be one of the main things that I would want to focus on.
Yeah. There's that sort of critical skill, I think, of reading, reading for pleasure, obviously, but when you're an author, you actually you need to develop a critical analysis around how you read a book. So, I'm really loving Holly's book at the moment. It's great, but I have to admit, I'm also reading it from a technical point of view as well. Oh, she's done that. That's really clever. If you approach your reading in that way, you learn, and that you did right, Ali. You mustn't sort of if you start to copy and imitate, it just comes off as that. It comes off as a pastiche, doesn't it? And no one really engages with it. But what you can do is, again, if you broaden your horizons, you will write better. And I think, to be honest with you, I always think in some ways the people that need to read the most are probably authors, and they're probably the people that have the least time to actually read as well. It's very cruel, but it is. I think it's essential to carve out that time because you might not think you're working on your writing, but actually you are. It makes it sound a bit. It's like I'm just being, studious all the time. Sometimes you still read for pleasure, but you just can't turn that internal editor off. Once you got to a certain level in terms of that sort of career and that kind of endeavor, it's very, very hard to switch off that side of your brain. And I think actually it's important you don't.
Yeah, I totally agree. Jenny Wirtz had said that the other day. As we all know, Stephen King, writers who have written a lot more books than us combined, have said that reading is the second most important thing you do as a writer after writing. And I hold that in dear regard. For me now, of course, because I'm blogging, it helps that much more because I'm constantly reading and reviewing books, and I learn so much because, especially when you read writers who are doing such dynamic and totally what we consider, especially the traditional world, out of the box, stuff that is just brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. I just finished reading Michael R. Fletcher and Beyond Redemption. Oh my god! Oh my god! I'm still recovering from that book, but it is just. I mean, the entire concept is so unique, staggeringly brilliant, dark, traumatic. Like I'm still traumatized, I think, but just incredible. And what are Tim Hardie and H.L. Tinsley? What are the books that really you've been reading recently? You go, wow, what's been wowing you recently in terms of your reading and in the last few months or years that has really caught your attention?
Well, I'm reading a certain book at the moment, which, if you wouldn't mind me, I'll just holding it up again because the cover is amazing. I mean, I've been very fortunate, very lucky. I've had an early copy of PL's new book, and it is just, I mean, you look at writers when they kind of bring out their debut novel, and if you enjoy their work, that you're going to probably give the second one another try, and you always hope for it to be as good as the first one. I can't even say how much the elevation between the first book and the second book, and I'm going to make him really embarrassed now, but it's like reading a different author, but still knowing it's the same person. It's still very much, no one writes like PL does. Like, it's so, I just, like, if you crack PL's head open, this whole world would just come out and it would just be enormous. Like, I don't know how you do it, but just the character work in it. I'm loving the relationships between the characters. I'm not going to say anything that's going to ruin it for anybody, because obviously I know it's very new and it's on pre-order at the moment, but it's a step up from the first book. It really is. And I just think if you want to read something, it reads like a saga to me. It's like an epic saga. So yeah, that's what I've been reading at the moment. I am currently around the 66% mark, and it's non-stop from start to finish.
There you go.
Thank you.
Stunned him into silence.
He's gone quiet.
Yeah, it's hard to shut me up, but she just did. So thank you, Holly. I'm completely humbled by that. Thank you. I'm honored.
I think it's everyone wants everything to be brilliant that they do, don't they? But in reality, as authors, you're always learning, and by definition, your debut, you're still learning. You always improve. And in fact, my agent John Jarrell said he doesn't know anybody in terms of who's a serious writer where their second book isn't better than their first, because of so much experience goes into writing and completing that first one. So yeah, it's not an insult at all about book one. What it's saying is you're constantly improving, and that world is getting wider all the time. So yeah, I'm also got that on my to be read list, and pretty excited about it. So P.L. Stewart's finally actually got some people to promote his own work. This needs to happen more often, Mr. Stewart. It really does. In terms of writers I'm excited about, like I said before, I think the Smith Bow finalists, I'm pretty excited about them all. That there's some I've definitely bought in terms of want to read and sort of explore further. I think I'm just going to shout out something that's probably a little bit less well known, but who just blew me away recently, which was Sean Crow, and I've read his. Basically, he's got. Let me get this right now. So he's got a novella out, which is called Valhalla Steel, and he's also got a full novel, which is effectively, the novella was like testing a concept, and then Quenched in Blood is a novel that sort of like builds that into the fully fledged product, which is, and again, this would only happen in the indie world. It's kind of like Judge Dredd meets sort of fey magic from ancient times, that there's guns and bullets and the seedy underbelly. It's kind of like got a Blade Runner feel to it, and again, you just when you pick up a book, you just know someone's got it. It's a really great feeling, and Sean, I think, is a little bit flying under the radar at the moment, but he has definitely got some serious talent, and he's putting out stuff that I've never ever read before, and combining it in a way that I've never ever experienced before. So I will give a shout out to Sean. I think of the people I've read this year so far, he's probably the one that's excited me the most. So and I'll definitely be getting back into that one. I think going back a little bit, I think I've had different. So as I've been sort of growing up, I've had different writers that have been really important at different stages that maybe have moved me on and got my interest. I guess it starts with people like Tolkien, doesn't it? And those sort of writers. Dragonlance was really important for me. I know that's a bit cheesy, but back in the 1980s, that was the series. If you're into sort of fantasy and that sort of thing, that was the series that in many ways moved that genre on. And I'd probably say Joe Abercrombie more recently. That's the first author I've read where I thought that's what they mean when they talk about somebody having an author voice. I never really understood what that meant before until I picked up Joe Abercrombie's The Blade itself. That sort of fairly seminal trilogy he put out, and I've never read fantasy like that before. You just have these moments you think, wow, it's moved the genre on, but it's different, it's fresh, and it's new. And I kind of feel Sean is a bit like that. Kind of like, if you could combine that, why is that not in a bookshop somewhere? That's brilliant. I would buy that. I know loads of people would buy that. Why is it not out there? So I don't know, a bit of a rambling answer, but those are the ones that are sort of like touch points to me along the way.
Just catch up on a couple of comments here really quickly. Hello, Ashley. Ashley says, you had me at Assassin's Creed. And Andres here, he says, I don't think I heard the expression grimdark gas lamp before reading H.L. Tinsley's novel.
I get that a lot. A lot of people, especially the gas lamp bit, I think tends to lose people. But I always just say to people, it's kind of, it's like if you think Jack the Ripper and Penny Dreadful and that kind of aesthetic, that pretty much covers it. I would just say as well, earlier on, I think PL said used the term grimdark darling. I would like to coin grim darling as a term, and I would like to be known as that now. So that's a new phrase then that I can just throw into things.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's a good one.
That's awesome.
And fellow author Joseph Carroll says, yeah, I think I'm more nervous for my second release next month than I was for my debut.
Yeah, I 100% relate to that.
It's because you know what you're doing. It's perfectly fine.
You know what to expect probably now. Hello, Jonathan. Thanks for coming by. And Jonathan adds, perhaps more tea and crumpets than what you may see from something written in the U.S. back from the UK discussion. Let's see. Yeah, it's weird to transition to a point where you start saying, yeah, this is a good book, you should read it. I think Joseph's referring to marketing. Jonathan says, I'm not much of a public speaker myself, but I am under the impression that social engagement is becoming a necessity for authors, especially for indie.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, Holly, go on.
No, I was going to say, I think as much as we would like that to not be the case a lot of the time, I think that, it very much is. We're becoming a very internet and social media based world in everything, essentially, not just writing. But, I think at the end of the day, like Tim pointed out earlier, a lot of authors, we're by nature, a lot of us an introverted group of people. So I think everyone is in that same boat where public speaking is probably not your favourite thing. But there's so many people out there that are going to want to engage and talk to you that, hopefully if you just find the right people, then you'll get that confidence and that comfort zone that you can just kind of live in as a writer in the public space.
Yeah. It's not as scary as you think either. I was slightly afraid that I would, encounter this sort of intelligence barrier. And everyone would know what they were doing and say, what are you here for? Why? What do you think you're doing? And just sort of like, it's a very welcoming forum actually, because fundamentally most writers are by definition readers. So a lot of them, they're just really interested to know what you're putting out there and what you're doing. So I was, in the end, I was a bit nervous about doing it. It definitely sort of, from my point of view, actually sort of G'd me on by the time I'd sort of like fully immersed myself in it. So yeah, it's not as dreadful as you first imagine it to be.
And Joseph adds, it's not easy to put yourself out there like that. I think that's what I would struggle with most is just, putting yourself out there and having that kind of voice is, or feeling like I'm a bother to everyone is what I would struggle with. I do that. I struggle with that now with content stuff. So And Jonathan, as I personally enjoy engaging on the live streams, I think it's a great tool for authors and creators alike.
Yeah, definitely.
It's funny how and, and again, I have that added privilege of being friends with these two fine people. So what Tim doesn't know about his books for me and his books is that I was looking for a replacement for A Song of Ice and Fire because uh, Steve and we talked about this ad nauseum on one of our podcasts, and even afterwards about the fact that GRM is probably not going to finish that series. I've accepted it now. It's good. I'm getting over it, slowly. But what the Brotherhood of the Eagle saga has done, because it's that good, it has kind of replaced my. I know he's keeping
How do I get this camera off? Let's just check.
He's replaced my longing for that type of political drama, because I love it. That intricate the minutia of with the warring clans and all the layers, like that's what I was missing. So having Brotherhood of the Eagle, I know maybe he's not writing as many books as J.R.R. plans for his series. He's already 4, and J.R.R. planned to write 7, but Tim's books are that good, and that they've kind of filled that void that that I was looking for, and that type of really immersive, really uber political, and all the machinations and the strategizing, and that's that fix that I needed. That's what his book has done. And then with Holly's books, everybody knows me that I always I'm such a hypocrite. I say, oh, I grimdark, and then I rush and read. I'm like, I'm getting Holly's book. I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to read it, right? And I have this love hate relationship with grimdark, and we have so many discussions about what grimdark is and what it isn't, or is it really is it like a leprechaun? Does it really exist, right? Yeah, it's, and it's just so hard to define. And then I said the other day that one day when my friend Bjorn Larson, another good friend of ours, is like, well, no, your book is moral grimdark, and I'm like, at first I was so offended. It's like, well, no, I guess that's a compliment, right? But Holly's book, I think, especially the combination, I think for me is what blows me with Holly's book and her writing, is a combination of the grimdark gaslamp that you just don't really find that to the same degree. I've seen great books like it. I've read some great books recently that are similar, and Trudy Skies comes to mind with her 13th Hour. That's a great series. Krista Batar, obviously another mutual friend of ours, with Legacy of Brightwash, another SBA profiles. But Holly's book is very unique, and yeah, it's that secret guilty pleasure that you feel like, oh, I shouldn't love this so much, but I love it to death. Like I keep saying, I don't like grimdark. You start reading, right? And like, yeah, it's that's what it's done for me. But do you two have any books that you feel like I shouldn't really like this book, but I'm in love with it? Like I can't, like I can't stop reading it and I want more. Like, do you have any authors or books that are like that?
First off, I love the imagery in my head now of PL having my book as a guilty pleasure, just reading it secretly somewhere where no one can see. I don't think I do, to be honest, because I don't really believe in guilty pleasures as a thing. I think if you enjoy something, you enjoy it, and then why should you feel any shame or any guilt about liking that particular thing? I love like the really kind of commercial. I read the Suki Stackhouse series, Charmaine Harris. I read those, and and just they were great fun. Like, I think I took a couple of them on a holiday, and I think people can be a little bit judgmental sometimes about, especially with things that are very kind of commercial. And I don't use that in a negative way. It's it is good to be commercial sometimes. Not everything that you read has to be a great literary classic. You can enjoy reading for the sake of reading and just wanting to have a bit of escapism or a bit of catharsis or whatever you're looking for. And if you get that out of a YA book or a romance or a horror crossover with a mystery, I don't know, then that's fine. You know, it's just read what you want to read and don't worry about what other people think about it. That's my view.
100% agree on that. I mean, and I think, anything that gets you reading is good. You know, I think often, again, we're in a little writerly bubble here, aren't we, and reader bubble. A lot of people don't read. In fact, probably about the majority of people don't read for pleasure, which I still find slightly terrifying. And then I just box it off and pretend it's not true. But the reality is, it's really important to pick up a book, and that reading habit. Yeah, there's nothing. Read what you enjoy is absolutely the only measure of a good book. Ultimately, if I'm going to call them guilty pleasures, it's not to denigrate them. It's just that they what I call lighter reads. I'll give a shout out to Owen Oakwood, who is a writer who lives relatively near to me, actually, who's basically putting out a series of short stories about a paranormal investigator called Organa Zeit. He writes a series of short stories where she goes and basically solves mysteries on behalf of the police. But they've got like a paranormal, superstitious kind of bent to them. So that the first one was about a set of possessed bagpipes, for example, and it's called the Organa Zeit Mysteries, and they're set in the Peak District, so they've got a great sense of place as well. And I basically it's my doorstep, so it kind of reads a bit like an alternate reality to where I could be living myself if those things were true. And I read that as a lighter read after reading Legacy of the Brightwash, which left me so emotionally drained. I couldn't interact with another human being for a week. I needed something different. So you read a book, don't you? Partly for the mood you're in, but also maybe as a bit of a counterpoint to what you've read before. I will just shout out one other. It is going to be a bit of a guilty pleasure, but I do have a soft spot for the Edible Highlander romance series by Karen McCompostine. That is a work of absolute words. It really is. It's frankly, the way she came up with this concept of it's a shifter romance. But the key point here is that ultimately it turns out that this particular lady's in love with a weir haggis. And it's set in Scotland, and it's written in a way that it's almost like it is in Scotland, but not quite. It's a work of absolute genius, and again, just a pure, I suppose, that is a pure guilty pleasure read. Great fun, and actually, Karen knows what she's doing with that book. Although it's in many ways it's dreadful, it's sort of in some respects it's also knowingly dreadful as well, and that makes it actually 10 times better than some of these po-faced, really serious things that, frankly, you can sometimes read and not get any pleasure out of. So, big shout out for Karen McCompostine and the Edible Highlander there.
I know Steve's got to get to that question. I just want to clarify one thing. Like when I say guilty pleasure when it comes to Holly's book, it's because I have this ongoing internal war, which some of you know about reading grimdark, and my hypocrisy about saying that my book isn't grimdark, and then someone, no, your book's grimdark, and then so it's actually Holly's book is actually responsible for me deciding to devote a specific month. Like basically after reading her book, I'm like, I can't say that I don't like grimdark, and I love this book to death, and I keep shouting out to the world, like I can't. Because Holly's book was actually the first real grim dark book I think that I read, and I loved it. So now she got me hooked, and so I devoted a month of my reading to reading April coming up, reading all grim dark authors. I'm reading the work of some of the big, aside from Holly, some of the really big indie grim dark names: Rob Hayes, Michael R. Fletcher, Ben Galley, and Clayton Snyder. So that's what I've devoted my reading to for the most part in April to. But Holly's to blame. I completely blame her because
I'm fine with taking the blame for that.
I was like, I swore an oath not to read grimdark, and then technically Tim's is too, but I in my head I can parse it off and no, well that's Norse inspired fantasy, and but Holly's was the label straight up gaslight grimdark, and so she's responsible. Blame Holly for why I read grimdark. So if anyone wants to know why I read grimdark, it's H.L. Tinsley's fault. So
she's responsible for a lot of things, and we need to have a word with her, really, don't we? But that's the point. That's because you're engaging, and you end up discovering stuff you would never normally pick up. It widens your horizons, and that's a good thing. I don't really think of mine as grimdark. I think of it as dark fantasy, but I think that's mainly because I have no idea. I don't want to go onto this because it'll just we'll be down there 2 hours on this call and we need to eat. But what is grimdark? I'm not sure there is a definition, and in some ways I think it's almost an unhelpful one. I prefer to describe mine as dark, Viking inspired fantasy. But yeah, I think read good books by good authors. That's really the top tip, isn't it? Forget the label and think that's not for me. Who'd have thought, a Weir Haggis shifter novel romance would be the book for me, and it absolutely bloody was.
Yeah. And Jonathan asks, is there a book you might be a little hesitant to read while on public transport?
Probably The Edible Highlander.
So this is why Kindles were invented, for discreet reading on public transport.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think there would be anything that I would be a little hesitant about reading. I mean, I might be a little bit hesitant about what's on the cover, possibly. If you're in a kind of area where there's families and kids and things, but no, I don't think. Certainly not that I would be able to mention by name.
And we do have a question for Tim. Have you been reading other Viking stories to see what's out there before you wrote your novel? Brian Wood wrote some great Viking comics with Northlanders and Sword Daughter, and as I'm reading your novel, Tim, it did remind me a lot of Northlanders. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one.
Yeah, again, that sort of question assumes that Tim Hardie does a level of research into his genre and everything. It was more, I didn't sort of like look around and think, this is what people are writing, I want to do that. It just came to me as a bolt that was the setting I wanted to use. And actually when that happened, because I almost shied away from, I suppose I'm thinking here more of things like the classic Viking sagas and stuff like that. I didn't want to go into all that and start reading around those in terms of reading into the subject, because I felt it might actually, again, I might start imitating that stuff rather than writing the book I kind of envisaged from the get-go and trying to keep that idea fairly pure. I haven't heard of those, I must admit. Giles Christian was mentioned to me, I think, is another comparison author. I've got one of his books on my bookshelf. I must admit, I confess, I'm still on the to be read part at the moment. But yeah, I had no idea it was even a thing, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. This is pre-social media Tim Hardie, living in a cave, writing books. I didn't actually even read fantasy for about 10 years, which it sounds a bit, this probably a better way to start answering this question than where I began in many ways. I fell out of love with fantasy for quite a long time. I moved over and read an awful lot of science fiction, authors like Ian M. Banks, people like that. I think I just got a bit bored of the genre, and that's why Joe Abercrombie was so important, because in about 2006, 2007, I picked up his book, and it kind of just opened my mind up to how that genre had moved on in the decade when I'd basically been ignoring it. Because the weird thing was, it never occurred to me not to write a fantasy novel, even though I hadn't read fantasy for about a decade. Make of that what you will. There's probably some sort of probably some deep hidden truth in that. So yeah, forget reading other Viking stories in terms of orientating myself on the area. I was kind of really only just rediscovering my love of fantasy when I made to start writing those initial books. That makes no sense at all, does it? Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Move on. Yeah.
I had a question for you two, and again, can't remember if we ever talked about this, but I realized that deep down, I mean, it's because of the kind of character I write, and you both have read my work too, and you know why. I get a perverse sense of enjoyment in torching my characters. I realize that in writing my third book, I'm thoroughly enjoying the fact that, what I'm putting my main character through, he's being completely destroyed in so many ways. Do you feel sometimes that way, that you get a certain satisfaction in making your characters go through a lot beyond for the sake of the story? Have you ever found that?
I mean, I'm probably going to get a little bit serious now, which I don't do very often, but I'll do for this question. I think for me, especially when writing the second book, the first book not so much. The first book, I used a lot of like my own kind of experiences in a very distant kind of way. So especially in terms of building the characters, because like you say, it is a grimdark book, so it does touch on kind of subjects that are probably quite difficult for some people. So there's a lot of there's trauma and grief, and I kind of used a lot of my own experiences for that. However, it was very much done from a distance. The second book, there is probably so much more of myself in this second book on a very kind of personal level. There are bits in the book that are, you know, they're directly from experiences that I've been through myself, and that's a very it kind of leaves you feeling very emotionally vulnerable. So I definitely wouldn't say, like, I mean, I probably get some kind of pleasure out of torturing some of the characters, but in terms of the ones that are directly from my own experiences, for me it's more like a catharsis. There are things that I've used in this book that I've never really spoken about, or never even realized that I felt that way about things. So for me it was almost about discovering things about myself. So if I kind of did what PL did, I think that would be a little bit strange, because it would almost be like torturing myself, which I don't want to do. So yeah, I mean, I think in future books I might have a bit more fun with it, but I think this one for me it was a bit more personal. So I think it was important for me to kind of show a little bit of, I don't want to say kindness, but almost like I needed to feel like there was a sensitivity that when I was writing it, that, you know, I needed to feel. I don't know if this is making any sense, so I'm going to stop talking now, but there you go.
It's making perfect sense.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, much better than the one I was going to come up with. But you're right, you made me stop and think there about actually things like Hall of Bones and stuff, that there's an awful lot of again, you often you're subconsciously putting stuff into your writing without realizing. So I think for me, the family element of Hall of Bones was something that I never really realized was in there until somebody pointed it out to me. And it, you know, without wishing to give away spoilers, it's a family that's in danger, and you know there are, you know, people lose, you know, people die. There are consequences basically from, you know, in terms of trying to survive that situation, really. And yeah, I think some people just sort of described it, you know, that they felt that in terms of, you know, people that they've loved and lost themselves. They kind of got that sense from the book, which I was totally, you know, again, people feeding that back, I was totally blown away by. I never even thought I was sort of unlocking that in a way. So it's not about doing horrible things to people and getting a perverse pleasure out of it. I think for me, it's much more about, to be honest with you, I kind of love all my characters. You know, I don't really have characters I hate, that I'm just there as the whipping boy that I want to do horrible things to. You know, a bit of an overwarm phrase, that they're morally grey characters. You know, Rothgar, the main central character of my series, can be an absolute arsehole at times, very much like yours as well. He's very self-centered, he's very young and very immature, for example, and that sometimes comes out. And you know, the people that are, you know, the antagonists, there's always a bit of an element of, you know, there's a reason why they're in opposition, and it's not always necessarily even their fault that they're actually in that sort of collision course. And I think people just could relate to that. It's more about trying to capture that sort of, you know, life is complicated, you know, and we go through a lot. And you know, if you draw, often you're sort of drawing it out through the writing experience, but also then the reader experience as well. So you know, it's not a perverse pleasure. It's more a kind of I suppose drawing those things together and trying to give something that making the reader feel. I suppose that's really what I'm trying to stagger towards here with this answer. Trying to make the reader feel something because it actually has some veracity and truth behind it. That's really important for me. And, you know, again, fantasy can be boxed off and say it's fantasy. It's ridiculous. You know, it can't possibly. You know, how can you then feel something really something that patently can't be true? But it's about taking that setting and using that setting in the way it shines that lens on things to actually bring out the truth of what's actually going on between our, you know, in our own lives, really. So, yeah, not perverse pleasure at all. It's more a case of, oh my God, I really can't do that. I've got to that point in the plot now where this has to happen. I'm not ready. Let's write a fourth book, and that I need to avoid that becoming what happens forever, because you know that does lead to the GRM situation, doesn't it?
Mm.
I think we've all learned a little something new about P.L. Stuart here tonight.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know how twisted that makes me, but of course, you know, my main character is definitely not always likable. Quite the opposite, and I think it's because for me the and again, now I'm going to get serious here. You know, for those of you who read my book, some of the themes are, you know, racism and religious intolerance and misogyny and homophobia and all these things, and my main character is someone who, you know, has some unfortunate views regarding those things, and I guess, you know, I like seeing him get his comeuppance. Even in the second book, there's a lot of he, he gets his comeuppance in some very unique ways. In the second book, and the third book is, yeah, he's I realize in writing it what I've done to him, but there's a reason for that, and it's more to illustrate, the ills, the societal ills that I'm discussing, and what they wrought, what's wrought on humankind by these ills, and if we have any hope of redemption coming back from this, and also, what do you do with all these people that feel this way? Especially people that have, a certain kind of authority or a certain kind of power or prestige, and people that are in charge. When their moral compass is that far off to the pill. What does that mean for the rest of us, and what do you do with that? So, but yeah, I did realize that. So maybe that's my, when you feel powerless to fight back against something, and I have felt very powerless at times in my life to make a difference or fight back against those things. I guess I can pretend I'm doing it in a book. I didn't need to see
you
it.
absolutely are. So just to break in though, you absolutely are doing it in the book because you're making people think. And I think that's the kind of genius of the character you've invented with Othran. Actually, he's so blissfully unaware. He's such. I need to be choosing words carefully on this live broadcast. He's so blissfully unaware of some of his shortcomings. There you go. That's perfectly radio friendly, isn't it? And it just shines a mirror. It's holding up a mirror to all those thoughts, and that the reader can't help but experience that in a very different way to how he's experiencing it. I think that's a really unique thing about the book. So I think don't. We're very quick to knock our own art, aren't we? But actually, it does that sort of thing incredibly well. Actually,
yeah, I think just to slightly echo what Tim's just said as well. I think what makes your book so unique as well is that you look at probably the majority of fantasy, and all through the book or all through the series, what you're doing is you're waiting for that hero to rise. So it's always this elevation of someone kind of starting at this point and moving up, whereas actually what you've done with Othran is that you're taking the reader on this journey where you're just waiting for him to fall, you're waiting for him to get that comeuppance. And I think to be able to do that, but do it in a way that it's very poised, it's very beautiful, like in terms of just the way that the prose is written and the way that it's approached, and it's just, you've taken something that is a very sensitive and very painful topic, obviously for a lot of people, but you've written it in such a way that you don't even realize that you're learning about this as you're reading it. You're just reading the book and kind of reading the story, and then afterwards it's an hour later where you sit down and you suddenly think, oh yeah, actually, now I think about it, I can see, Othran did this thing, and you can see where he was thinking about it, where he was coming from, what the other people are thinking about it, and it's very subtle, and it's just very well done.
Thank you. I guess, like you said, a lot of us use our work for, it's never about, we write our books, and as we always talk about, books belong to the reader. After you've written them, they no longer belong to us as much as we think that they do, that we still have ownership. We have accountability for what we write, but the book is out there in the wild, and people are going to have their interpretations of it come what may, right? But I think when we write them, we have all these complex pieces of ourselves that we weave into our books that, sometimes it's on purpose, and it's very planned and strategic, and sometimes it just comes out maybe subconsciously. And but I'm humbled by the praise by both of you. Thank you. Two people I obviously, as I said, immensely respect. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to thank all of you for coming by today. It's always a pleasure to chat with all of you. So it's great that we were able to get everyone here with all the time zones and time changes and daylight savings time and all that fun. At this time of year is always just a complete mess for me because I always manage to screw it up. But thankfully we managed to pull it off today. But Tim and Holly, if you can tell us where people can find you, where's the best place to connect with you if someone wants to find more of your work, or just to say how much they love your books?
Tim, after you.
Okay, that's giving me less time to remember what they actually are. Okay, so yeah, Twitter, probably the best. I'm most frequently on Twitter, so that's probably my favoured social media platforms. That's Tim Hardie Author. Facebook, it's the same, except it's Tim Hardie Author Public. So that's the main sort of official page, effectively. And then you can also find me on, I've got a website that's Tim Hardie Author, just for consistency, .co.uk, and that provides all the links to sort of the books I've written, but also sort of things like the blog and interviews and things I've done as well. So yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yes, so similarly, the best place to find me is probably on Twitter, which is at Holly Tinsley, but it's Tinsley, Tinsl 3Y. I always have to air spell it. I don't know why I do that. I also have I have a website which is to be honest, infrequently updated, but I am going to get better, which is HL Tinsley Writes. And my books are on Amazon. And as I mentioned earlier, the pre-orders for the new one are available now. I'm just going to get that last minute bit of marketing in there.
Nothing wrong with that.
So yeah, but Twitter's probably the main one for kind of engagement.
Mm-hmm. And of course, PL, where's the best place to find you, and where can people pre-order your book?
As you guys know, Twitter is my preferred social media platform. My website's www.plstuart.com. Twitter is at plstuartwrites. I'm active on Goodreads. Steve and I are both honored to be members of the outstanding Before We Go blogging team, led by the amazing Beth Tabler. So I frequently write and review books. So you can find those books reviews on Before We Go blog, and also on my website. And and of course, the biggest thing I've been involved in recently is page chewing with Steve. So please, I encourage you to check out page chewing. This is a phenomenal. We keep saying, Steve and I, like we're gonna top this up like the last episode. We just keep somehow, obviously because of the quality of the guests that come on, and we're so grateful to have you and Tim Hawley. This has been really a special treat. So thank you for coming.
That's been great. Thanks very much.
And thanks everyone who came by to interact with us. It's always great when people ask questions in the chat or ask about what we're afraid to read in public transport. Thanks everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks everyone.